Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode 8. My guest in this episode is Dr. Paul J. Leslie. Dr. Leslie is an author, educator, and psychotherapist in Aiken, South Carolina. He specializes in creative, resource-directed approaches to working with individuals and families. Paul is presently the coordinator of the Behavioral Sciences program at the Aiken Technical College. And in this conversation, I will be talking with Dr. Leslie, firstly about a course that he's developed, a program that is available on his website called The Secrets of a Magical Session. And this course is intended for coaches and therapists who want to expand the dynamic of their practice and learn some things about themselves as well. We will also be discussing one of his many books called Low Country Shamanism, about the art and practice of hoodoo and root doctors and so many other fascinating things that spring from the southeast of the United States, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, coastal, and a tiny bit of North Florida. So please join Dr. Leslie and myself in this fascinating, entertaining, and informative conversation. And thank you so much for coming along with us. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Paul J. Leslie to the IdeaCast interview series. I'm looking forward to an informative and entertaining dialogue with Dr. Leslie. And so, Paul, welcome. Very grateful to have you on this show. So thank you for being able to be here with me today.
Well, thank you, Justin. I'm honored that you asked. I'm always honored when people are interested enough in me to want to talk to me. And I think you're doing some really fascinating work in what you're doing. So I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. And yes, I hope what I'm doing is productive and reaches out to the world at large and has good results. And I look at each of these conversations as being a little creation that myself and my host put together, and we submit it to the world, and it has a life of its own. So I'm looking forward to that and the maturation process and what our dialogue yields. And again, as I said, it's going to be creative and entertaining because your book, Low Country Shamanism, is you can't make some of that stuff up. And it's just, and I say that in a good way, like it's so creative and so amazing. And it's our little, I'm in Florida, you're in South Carolina, it's our little corner of the world. And so,
right.
So the book was very impressive to me. But I do want to start with a program that you've recently launched, and it is geared towards coaches and therapists. There are some key components in that I'd like to cover with you to help inform folks that have come to this interview to learn more about you and discover this project or learn more about this program that you've created. And the program is called Secrets to Creating a Magical Session. So would you mind giving us some information on that? And
no, I'm delighted to.
Okay.
This really has been a work in progress over probably close to a decade, if not more so. I primarily work in the field of psychotherapy, and I have always been very motivated to find out, pardon me, how to help people change and how to help people transform their lives. And I've started this process of wondering, is it more about just adjusting things in one's life, or is there a greater, more dynamic picture of change? So the idea of creating a magical session was to create a session in which, when a therapist or coach is working with a client, not only are they assisting the client meet their goals for whatever the session is, but they're creating the conditions to allow some kind of transformative experience to emerge that not only just changes the session, but changes the client and possibly changes the therapist. I've come to the conclusion after many years that my field of psychotherapy is part of a long healing tradition that has changed names and based on a Western culture. But you'll find in a lot of healing traditions similar threads. So I was kind of looking at psychotherapy as a healing practice. But the more I looked at how a lot of it is presented, I got to be honest with you, I came away with a feeling that something was lacking, not so much in the techniques or the theories, but just how they're applied, how the context is set for these kind of experiences to emerge. So that kind of set me on a little quest to where I talked with all the great psychotherapists I could, people I knew, people who I didn't know. I just really spent a lot of time interacting with some pretty big name people and trying to figure out patterns in the way they did things. And then after I felt like I'd exhausted a lot of that, I decided to move outside that realm into the realm of looking at alternative healers, people who were able to, their clients were able to create their own kind of magical sessions, but maybe we're not locked into that context of psychotherapy. So I would talk to people like body workers, medical intuitives, psychic mediums, hoodoo doctors, Tibetan Buddhist monks, anyone who had some aspect or insight on healing, not so much to replicate, but to try and understand what those connecting threads were. And one time I was talking to a gentleman who was kind of in my area, was kind of a hoodoo doctor who practiced kind of the indigenous African-American magical and healing system. And he made a comment, something to the effect of that he didn't really do anything. He could only really set the conditions in place for magic to happen. And that's when I think it kind of clicked in my head that it really is the context. It really is the framing. It really is all of these things that come together to create these transformative experiences. It's not really a technique we do, because any technique that we do within the context of transformative healing is more inclined to work for that purpose. It's not so much just the technique itself, and it's not just how it's applied, but when it's applied, how the relationship is between the coach and the therapist and the client. All these things that unfortunately not enough attention, in my opinion, is paid to in our field, because we become so enamored of new ideas and new techniques and theories. And to be quite blunt, most of the new stuff is really old stuff that's been remarketed and blended and put together. Right. There's nothing new under the sun. But it all works. I mean, the research shows that all the major theories and techniques in psychotherapy work. But for me, something was missing. So I put together this course to share all those missing pieces. And in the course, it's based on a lot of empirical evidence. It's also based on a lot of pulling and patterning of people who are able to more consistently than not create these amazing interactions with their clients. And the number one thing that I've come away from this whole research I've done, the whole work I've done, is it really is with the client. Two authors, Bohart and Tallman, kind of had the idea that every client is really self-healing, and the therapist's job is really to activate that process, kind of like a placebo. If you're told, you're getting a medication and your body responds to it, it was the suggestion. So the body's creating a self-healing process. Well, therapy, although it's not a placebo, is part of a way to activate a self-healing process, as is most indigenous healing rituals and practices. So rather long-winded overview, but that's kind of what led me into this idea and to offer books and this course that I'm offering program on how you do go about, what are those conditions that create that authentic kind of transformative experiences.
Right. And in researching your work, I know you've talked about collaborative exchange with the client or the patient or the person you're working with. And this integrative approach that you're offering here, as you said, it opens up a dynamic that may not otherwise be there if you're going straight down that path of clinical or more austere means. And I say austere in relation to what you're teaching here.
Right.
So it makes perfect sense. And as you said, the placebo effect, it's throwing the pharmaceutical industry their hands up in the air. And so yeah, there's a lot of salience there and or opportunities there, I think, for reaching effective outcomes through that dynamic. So part of what you teach is to have these clinicians or coaches trust themselves. So is that an intuitive trusting process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when you really trust what you're doing, there is a certain ease that you approach what it is, whatever it is. So if you trust that you're going to make a good cake, the stress just kind of disappears. Doesn't mean the cake's always going to be perfect,
right?
But just when you trust to do the best that you can do with what you have in the moment. Now, to gain that trust, first and foremost, you do need good training. I'm not someone who says, just get in and do whatever, whenever.
Yeah.
I think you need to have some kind of foundation, much like any kind of art or athletic endeavor. You have to have that foundation of something. But there comes a point to where sometimes you have to open up your mind, if you're a therapist or a coach, that you're getting information sometimes from different sources that you're unconscious of where it's coming from. And if you feel it strongly enough and it's not unethical to do, I don't see why not to do it. You may be sitting with a client and somehow you get a certain image in your mind. And the image has absolutely nothing to do with what you're hearing, but yet it's such a profound image that your intuition may be sending you a signal. So I'm advocating it may be okay to politely interrupt and say, I just want to share this with you. I'm getting this image of whatever in my mind. Does that mean anything to you? Now, it may mean nothing to them. And you know what you say? Okay, sorry, just please continue, right? Or most of the time, you'll find that it is tied to something. It might not be a psychic function where you're getting, this, in-depth information from, esoteric places. It may be something that your unconscious mind picked up by the way your client said something or the way they shifted in their seat. And I think to ignore that information, you're leaving out something that can be really profound. And what's funny is that most of the bigger name therapists I've talked to, when they've had these breakthroughs, these wow experiences, most, not all, but most of the time, something like that's happened. They trusted their intuition, their unconscious mind to just go with something, which led into some aspect of the session that they wouldn't have had. Now, it's really difficult to trust yourself if you put too much emphasis on outside authorities. And I think in any field, we have a tendency to do that. If we've gotten to the place that there is a level of competency, again, in whatever endeavor, taking in some new information from people is a good thing, but it comes a point to where when you have to make a decision, you have to rely on previous learning, your teaching, and your gut. And if you are so worried about, some outside authority saying you're wrong, you're crazy, or something like that, you're maybe indirectly limiting your ability to provide a avenue of healing to your client. So if you're talking with somebody and in your gut, you just get this feeling to ask them about fire engines, and it may not have anything to do with anything. And you ask them and they go, I don't know anything about fire engines. Why not just talk about fire engines for a second? Maybe that's a metaphor you need to say. So, with fire engines, their job is to help put out fires, like when things get out of control. What's getting out of control? What's burning that needs to be put out in your life? That may be a way to kind of open up into a different context, different frame of the interaction. But we might not get there if we're too hesitant to really accept that we have sometimes this incredible amount of intuitive information. And I think we all do. It's just whether or not we're willing to accept that we do. And if we're too afraid that, we're not following a script or a standardized procedure or those kind of rigid patterns of working, we miss a lot of opportunities to open up dialogues to have that deep level of connection with people. And most of the time, I think that if people trust themselves enough, I mean, amazing things can come out of those interactions.
Right, right. So a good reminder if you're in a session that you're not subject to peer scrutiny or peer or authority review or anything like that. This is you and your client. And your mentioning of the intuition and the trust reminds me of Dr. Peter Levine's aha moment in the early 1970s. He wrote, I forget the name of the book he wrote, but he was with a young woman in, I think, 1972 or 4, and she was struggling and he was struggling, and he just, there's a tiger chasing you, you know, he just kind of threaded that out, blurted it out, and it did something. And and so I guess in his aha moment, or his post aha moment, he realized that it was a type of closure. It was a type of bringing something to reenacting something or bringing something to a head. And so, like you said, you never know what you say, like you said with the fire truck, might open up that salience landscape for the person with the therapy.
Right. And if you try to use like the example that Peter had with the tiger, you try to use that with every client, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Because it's not authentic to your intuition. It's got to come from within you in that moment. You have to honor that kind of spontaneous energy in that moment to say or demonstrate those kind of things. I think there's many people who try to model so much on others that they don't have much of their own identity in their work because they're not, in tune with their own sense of self. And when you're not really in tune with yourself, a lot of things go by, and then you try to fit your clients into templates that have already been created for other people. It's kind of like if I were to come over to your house and bring you my dad's jacket and say, I want you to try this on. And you try the jacket on, but it's like either too big or too loose, or you can't button it, or it's too long. And then I get frustrated with you because the jacket doesn't fit. It's kind of, well, it's not your jacket. And unfortunately, I will say this, I think too much in my field is focused on the jacket and not on the person who's going to be wearing it.
Yeah, great metaphor, great metaphor. And I think something that you've taught and to me is part of this program is the potential and not pathology. And that, again, is giving yourself license to see beyond the sort of billiard ball and mechanistic structures of the very clinical aspect of your work in your field, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a struggle because in psychology, psychotherapy, so much over the last 100 years has been focused on those things that are wrong. I mean, we generally deal, particularly in therapy, we deal with problems that people bring us. And there have been some reprieve from a problem-focused type of therapy here and there. I mean, I remember the humanistic field and the really kind of the 60s and 70s were pushing the idea of, that a fully functioning person, like Carl Rogers talked about, the self-actualized individual that Maslow discussed. And it kind of shifted away from this idea that there's one way to be in the world to fit in. And, it kind of helped to relax a little bit of those focus on pathology. Now, that term pathology is the study of disease. So now we're already, just by using that, we're locked in the context of a medical model.
Okay. So
if we see our clients as diseased by something that they're doing, I mean, it's a whole different way to approach them than if they say, oh, well, they've lost access to their strengths or their resources, or they're too focused on their deficits instead of their strengths and the resources, or they're not bad people, they just have some bad patterns, and it's just a different way to look at things. But I have rarely ever heard of too much in my research, too much transformation happening when excessive attention was paid to pathology. It's like when we have an interaction with a client And I'm not talking like the first session where we're learning about the problem and about what's going on, but once we got into it, if we're spending the bulk of our time focusing on what's wrong, or creating these themes about therapy in which everything is a problem, it tends to kind of limit us. I mean, you just think that the very act of solution, in order to have a solution, you have to have a problem. So already there's this kind of, as a mental research institute, you say this vicious circle to where they're kind of stuck in what they're trying to solve their problem with a solution that isn't working, and they keep trying, and it makes it worse and worse and worse. And the more we focus on the etiology of where the problem comes from and how bad the problem is, we just end up having these discourses that are just fully just saturated with nothing but limitation. Mm-hmm. So just the very act of, like we're saying, if your intuition sends you someplace away from the problem, that may be a good place to follow. I noticed when I was doing my research, a lot of the therapists that I talked to and worked with who would have these transformative moments more often, they would often do things that were out of the ordinary, do things that were off script. And I think part of that is because right then there is a separating from the problem. I think this is what I'm kind of finding as I stay in this field more and more. We've got it kind of backwards, is that we think that the client's problem is real. And, life is what it is. And we're so busy trying to find solutions to problems that a lot of times we create these themes of therapy. And all of the themes, like I say, all the theories and techniques, whether it's psychoanalysis, behavior therapy, cognitive therapy, family therapy, et cetera, all of them are effective. I mean, the research of 40 years has shown that. Mm-hmm. But no, not one's better than the other when you strip all those things apart. So what we're doing is we're putting these themes onto clients. So a client comes in with a problem, let's say anxiety. So if they go to a psychoanalytic, a traditional psychoanalytic therapist, well, they're going to put a theme on it. Oh, well, the reason you may have this anxiety is due to unconscious conflicts that may be due to id impulses and all of that. There's absolutely no truth to that, but it's not false either. Mm-hmm. It's a theme that the therapist puts on, and if that theme works for the client, they can do great things. Same thing if same case, you come with your anxiety, you come to the cognitive therapist. Well, it's the irrational thoughts and thinking you have. And you go, okay, that makes sense. That's the thing. It's not true at all, but it's not false at all either. Right. So it's these themes that we create. So I'm at the point now where I'm seeing all of the major themes work, but what I'm finding is all of them still involve focus on the problem. So if you're a psychoanalysis patient, client, the problem is always there. There's unconscious conflicts. So what's the solution? Well, free association, dream analysis. Okay, you go to the cognitive therapist. What's the problem? It's anxiety. Okay, what's the solution? Okay, well, if the problem is unconscious conflicts in psychoanalysis and cognitive therapy, it's conscious thoughts. You're thinking these thoughts of limitation or cognitive distortions, and the solution would be to kind of dispute those. You go to humanistic, and then it's, well, you're being blocked, you don't have enough conditions, unconditional positive regard. So all of them keeps involving problems. So when the theme is transformed in therapy out of problem solution, kind of back and forth, and you go into areas to where the resources, strengths, and abilities are that have nothing to do with the problem, what I'm finding is you're creating a new thing that has nothing to do with the pathology, as we'll say. So if your theme continues to involve the pathology, I find it harder to have those transformative experiences. So we may need to create new things that have nothing to do with what the person perceives as a problem. Mm-hmm. And then when you find a strength that they're in and you cultivate that strength, that strength doesn't stay stuck in a little box. It starts to flow through all avenues and areas of a person's life, and they may end up solving their own problem.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the best solution-oriented therapy are the solutions that the clients come up with. One of my mentors, Bill O'Hanlon, who's kind of the founder of solution-oriented therapy. There's solution-focused therapy and solution-oriented therapy kind of happened at the same time. I consider them cousins,
Okay.
But Bill's changed his name of his therapy from solution-oriented to possibility therapy. Because he found that just by tweaking out little differences and possibilities, sometimes that was enough in the client's experience and their thinking to shift rather than this excessive etiology problem focus. I hope that made sense.
For me, it did. Yeah, it did. I was able to keep up. And so my takeaway is that the therapist should come to the session armed with all of this information for themselves, for their ability to do a diagnosis perhaps, or do an assessment of what's going on. But then the patient or the client is going to show up wearing their own skin, having their own psyche. And so therein lies that need for a bridge to go between what as a trained and certified clinician, and so again that expansive tool chest, I guess, of the clinician, and novel thinking will only benefit the client. And the fact that you say that, and I know a tiny little bit about life coaching, and that strikes me that it is an interrogative exchange with your coaching client, and so that you bring it out of the coaching client what they need to hear or understand or feel, or so that's probably like a layer, I don't want to assign hierarchy, but a different layer of that kind of process to a degree, right?
Right. And I think most people down deep know what they want, or what they know what they don't want, certainly, but they know what they want, but they limit themselves. So sometimes when you're trying to get the solution out of the client, they're so used to trying to solve it in, like I say, this vicious circle. And that's the way of solving it may be due to societal, cultural expectations that, they're trying to solve it within a certain frame of experience that doesn't really suit who they are. So it becomes very complex. And I don't mean that it's hard, but more of a complexity to think more systemically rather than a linear, oh, it's this, you do that. I can remember I was in a training a while back with Dr. John DeMartini, and he was it's about goal setting and those kind of things. And he had this woman in the training, and it all came down to, she just didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. She didn't know and he's like, no, you do know, and he's real supportive, you do know. And she just kept this, as Warner Earhart would call it, this racket up that she didn't know, because I think she's probably used to people jumping in and saving her. Well, DeMartini wouldn't have it any of that. And he just he's yelling at her, and it's like, God damn it, you know what you want, and she's really upset, but we were all hearing it. She knew what she wanted. It's like she wasn't willing to say it out loud.
That step.
Yeah. That she wanted to go write children's books, but society and culture says, how can you do that? She had all this craziness, but her little racket she was running kept her from, and so she's been trying to solve this problem over and over with a terrible solution, which is not being present, which is not examining that, who am I really? And so, like I say, it goes to much more complex. She didn't enjoy getting yelled at, but I think she liked when she finally got it out, it's like this is really what I want to do. And the fact that everyone said, that's a great idea, do it.
Right. Well, you hear stories about old Hollywood, and some of the better known directors would just terrorize their actors to get things out of them. And that's kind of inhumane, but, and I'm not trying to put that in the context of DeMartini, but it's sometimes you have to get an evocative reaction out of somebody to get them to go to a place they've never gone before, to experience or realize or actualize, as Maslow's, to get this thing out and see it for themselves, I guess.
Yeah, if that lady was my client, I don't think I would have taken that tone with her. I'm reminded, as you're saying about old Hollywood directors, you may be remembering the Jackie Cooper. He was the young boy. He was one of the Little Rascals, played in the movie The Prize Fighter, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to cry at the end and be devastated with the fighter to beg him not to go in the ring. So the director, he had his dog with him. The director had one of the guys take the dog around the other side of the studio. And he said, "You're going to hear a shot. I've shot your dog." And they shot in the air.
Right.
So this 8-year-old kid, here's an authority figure. He is distraught. And then he says, "Now go do this." Okay. And all that pain that it just came out is an amazing work of art, but how incredibly cruel, just absolutely cruel.
Right.
Having said that, it was an amazing scene, and it allowed that young child, which shouldn't be doing that to a young kid, in my opinion, but to access that part of him that he might not have been able to otherwise. So, you know, right or wrong, I mean, it kind of, who's making that distinction? But I think there's sometimes better ways than you know, pretending to shoot dogs.
Yeah, right. It's gone a little far, right? And but he got a result, and hopefully Jackie was given a little bit of comfort afterwards. I'm sure as soon as he saw the dog, you know, I think 8-year-olds are more resilient than us as adults sometimes. So he's like, yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Hopefully he just didn't carry it forward too far, but we'll see. And so this brings us to the idea that you, as a clinician or a coach, you can have a transformative outcome or solution or et cetera, versus just an effective one, right? That's kind of where we're in that realm with that, right? And that's part of what you'll be providing.
I think that's, you're making an important distinction there that I kind of make as well, is that most good therapists are effective, and that means that you're meeting the treatment goals. So to me, it's like, it's that level of, okay, good, effective treatment goals, where a transformative or a magical session, as I'm calling it, encompasses more in that the person whose goals are being met are not only having their goals met, but are not the same person that they were. There's some part about them that has been transformed to where they see not only that the goal's been reached, but they see themselves differently, the world differently, the way they interact differently. It's more than just, okay, what's the problem? Okay, let's set some goals. Did you do these things? Okay, how is your problem on a 10 scale? Oh, it was at a 7 or 8, which is pretty high. Now it's a 4. Okay, we got it. Good. So let's do 2 more sessions. We'll get it down to a 2. We'll shake hands and say goodbye. And that's helpful. But I was more interested in these things to where not only am I at a 2, that I can't even fathom that ever being a problem. Or if it does happen, that I have the resources that I can transcend that I can transcend my old sense of self that was all tied up with that problem. So yeah, for me, that's the missing piece. You know, what's funny is I've talked and written about this too. I think a lot of people are wanting that, and unfortunately, they don't see psychotherapy as being able to give them that. And I think that's why we see such an increase. One of the reasons we see such an increase with interest in going to psychics and mediums for guidance and help. The coaching industry, I mean, it's just past 15 years just exploded because people don't feel that, even though they've got all these issues, they don't want to be diagnosed, or they don't know that therapy will help. They get a lot of bad information about therapy, whatever the reason. So, you know, we have all the tools in therapy to create these experiences. But I think people down deep, I think they want something more than what they believe we can offer them. And I think we haven't done a very good job of doing that. And I understand we work so hard. I'm saying we, I'm at the therapy field.
Right.
We've done worked really hard to be as authentic, but also to be seen as a professional. We will just be blunt. I think a lot of psychologists have always wanted to be medical doctors, at least seen that way. And so the more scientific they can get, the better, the more evidence-based and all of that. And I'm not saying that's bad at all. I'm a big supporter of research and outcome research in particular.
Sure.
But, you know, human beings have a fascinating thing to put themselves in dichotomies.
Mm.
So we're all going to be linear and scientific. Are you going to be, artsy fartsy, fairy, new
Right.
age? I'm
Pixie
like,
dust.
there is there's such a in between those two, so much
Right.
room
Oh,
to
yeah.
meet our clients where they are, bringing the tools from evidence-based stuff in a context of healing and transformation. And I just personally don't believe that my field's done a very good job of doing that. I think we're more interested in making sure that the insurance and Medicaid and Medicare pay us, that we get to get certain rounds at certain institutions, all these kind of things that, to me, that's all nice, but it's not really about healing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you're leading that renaissance, and I'm sure there are others out there that are. Well, it is. I see what you're saying, and I see it in academia. I see it. I study philosophy a lot, and I see that you have people trying to not eliminate philosophy. This sort of the philosophy of science people and the physicalists are just trying to say, oh, we don't need philosophy. That's for the 16th century, and yada yada. And it's like, no, we're humans, and we are. We are mechanical and we are part of a causal chain. And I buy into that to an extent, but nonetheless, there is a dynamic or there is a essence to us that is, as you said, it needs to be acknowledged, and curiosity needs to be explored on the part of those who will assert that they are therapists and healers, or even coaches for that matter. And honestly, it is opinion alert, but I would rather folks like yourself bring that in than people going to coaches, because there are really good coaches in the world, but there are also situations where a person may need help beyond what a coach can do. And so there's things falling through cracks and bypassing situations and things like that. So I think it's great that that you're part of that, and that as far as that, I don't know how big this is becoming, and I hope it does blossom to where people can, and again, like academia, people can feel comfortable saying things and doing, even science, even the community of science itself, where you're supposed to be agnostic with science, but you can think and feel, you can do your metaphysics and not be afraid of what people are going to say to you. And I think there's a little bit of that cultish behavior in every discipline right now.
Every discipline, absolutely, and like every discipline, even when you give evidence to counter to the contrary, no matter what the evidence is, if you're in that belief system, you're just naturally going to reject the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it firsthand. I've seen a dear colleague of mine who, in my opinion, is one of the preeminent researchers of outcomes, being called a cult leader because he was just showing that all the major schools of therapy were great. They worked, but there wasn't one that always outperformed the other. And he had all the research, 20 years worth of data to say it. And it became this, certain other well-known person, turned into this war and almost character assassination. And I think it's the same kind of thing with anytime you make an idea, a sacred cow. The universe, and this is my opinion now, the universe is geared, I think, to balance itself. So when we start to go one way, there's going to be somebody, even if it's just one person, who tries to pull the other way.
Pendulate.
So if you have a great, idea and you've got evidence, there's going to be someone out there who's going to be coming and trying to pull it down, trying to destroy it, try to demean it, whatever it is. But that's what creates the balance. Right. We live in a world, Justin, to where people truly believe that the only way to be happy is to eradicate sadness. And that is impossible. We live in a world where the only way they think that we can have goodness is to eradicate badness. Mm-hmm. That is impossible. We just got to get rid of all the hate, and then we'll have nothing but love. Impossible. I've never seen a one-sided coin. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So this is the battle. And, you read the history of science. There's nothing new. Yeah. I'm just rereading some stuff about William James, who, in my opinion, is probably one of the most brilliant people the United States has ever had, and how his career was savaged by some other well-known psychology people because of his interest, his pragmatic interest in researching psychical research. So here's a guy who, I mean, and if you read his research, he's some pretty solid grounding in how he's viewing it. But the fact he even researched something, they were trying to destroy his reputation publicly as a researcher and all. Well, just swing back, to today or back in the 60s or 50s. This is just this cycle that humans never learn. That the science fiction writer Robert Anton Wilson said one time, his goal, he says, I don't believe anything, but I have some suspicions. And I think that's what a good researcher may have.
Oh, absolutely. And I lean into things, but I also try to at least feign that I'm practicing epoche when I see something. And so there are things I dismiss, and there are things that, again, I lean into, but I don't dismiss them outright. I just say, least probable and maybe more probable. And that, I find my comfort zone in there. So, more of that might be good. And I say that possibly in self-deception, that I think I'm, this sort of agnostic epoche kind of person, and I probably am deceiving myself a little bit, but I do try to practice it and maybe learn to someday master that, so that whatever is presented to me, I don't immediately reject, or I don't immediately see as controversial or whatever. And but as about academia and science and everything, there are titans, there are egos, there are intellectual stars and public figures and celebrity. I mean, you see it so much, and some of it devolves down into like professional wrestling kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
I see debates on TV or YouTube between intellectuals, and I'm just like, yeah, this is just a show.
Well, what was it a couple of years ago with all the craziness that the political realm has turned into? Jesse Ventura made the comment. He said, I'm really glad to see that politics has finally risen to the level of professional wrestling.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's saying something right there. Or reality TV might be the 21st century equivalent of that for anybody that's under 40. But so your new program, people can discover and find out more about it on your website, and I will have all that information down below in the description field. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in this, who's watching this interview, to please go to Dr. Leslie's website and discover it. Also on his YouTube channel, he has an announcement video. It's only about 3 minutes long, and it will give you a little bit of insight too. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that will help get people to check out what you have available, what you're featuring?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my work. It means a lot to me in this realm. It's not a hard sell. I'm not here to go. You got to do. Oh, I'm going to give you the 50
You're nobody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just think that if you're interested in really, you're a therapist or a coach, you went into this field to help people and to be a healer. I think I'm provide you with some things that may help you redirect back to it, to where you might have felt that you've been disconnected from. And to me, that's the thing. If you're in any field to help people, we have some of that healer archetypes. Well, my goal is just for this course, or for my work in general, is to connect back to that healer that you naturally have, and not be so swayed by outside authorities or the psychotherapy marketplace, or pundits of the latest and greatest thing, but to be more centered in yourself with that trust, that ability to create these magical moments that I think you could, you might benefit from it. So, I think it's a good course. I'm proud of it, and I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they'll benefit from it as well. So again, if you're watching this video, just check out in the description field, and you can go discover that. So shall we move into low country shamanism and talk about that a little bit? You have so many books, but as you mentioned in another interview that I was watching on your YouTube channel, this one has been this one's taken off, and so we'll start with this book, and then going down the road, I'll bring you back and we'll talk about other publications of yours. I'll say to those watching, I read this book. I don't have the second. I think there is a second edition, right? I have the first edition, I believe. Did you
No,
mention?
it's a standalone.
Oh, it's the one edition. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I misunderstood. Okay, so anyway, I enjoyed it. It was informative and it was entertaining at the same time. And on the subject of this program that you're providing, this is a great book to read ahead of time because it'll give you a little bit of almost a backstory to what brought you to bringing these elements into a coaching or therapy session. So, Low Country Shamanism, characters, stories, a breakdown of what the hoodoo is and the root doctors and the golas. Is it gola? Is that how you pronounce it?
We pronounce it gullah.
Gullah, thank you. I saw a movie, oh God, it's been 92 was, 27 years ago, Daughters of the Dust, and it was all about the gulas of the outer islands. But I have to watch it again because again, it was in 92 or whatever when I saw it. So, but anyway, the gulas and just some of the characters that are in this book. So I guess we could open it up because when you hear hoodoo, I think a lot of people are going to, immediately think of New Orleans. And as Dr. Coyote said that voodoo, I think he referenced it as being a religion, whereas hoodoo is more of a practice. It's an art, more of a phenomenal thing beyond, not in the confines of religion. So,
right.
So hoodoo is?
Well, for me, what I've taken away is hoodoo is a practical way for people who believe in such things to create magic and healing in their lives. So I call the book, I call the book Low Country Shamanism because this area that I live in, the North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, a tiny bit of Florida, that coastal area they've traditionally called the Low Country because it's much lower down, swampy areas. This is where a lot of plantations that made indigo and rice existed. And the two main slave ports on the East Coast, particularly the southeastern coast, was Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. So they brought all these African people against their will to the United States, and they came into these ports. And these people brought a lot of their spiritual ideas, their belief systems, their healing methods with them. And what happened is over time, pretty much to survive, you just had to adapt. And these were very resilient people. So they would use this backbone of African magic and blend it with Protestant Christianity, which was the primary on this side coast is a primary religious orientation. And they kind of created their own way to heal, their own way to give them some hope. Spells and rituals and things like that. It was kind of their own way to create a psychotherapeutic way, if you will, to create a sense of hope in essentially hopeless situations. It's also a tool for social control because generally in most of the larger slave communities, there's one or two individuals that were known as root doctors that we call today hoodoo doctors. The root doctors were healers. But there were also people who maintained the peace. If there were disputes, they'd come in and negotiate, or that they'd threaten people with magic. If there's a lot of mischief going on, they'd say, well, don't get the root doctor involved because he or she can put a spell on you and get you to do wrong. They also were there to the reason called root doctors originally got its source due to herbal healing. So they would go out and have certain herbs and roots and things from nature to help people heal, because generally they didn't call the doctors if slaves were sick because it cost money, unless it was something life-threatening. Mm-hmm. Because again, slaves were considered property. Right. So if it was life-threatening, you'd lose money. So if the slave's sick for a little while, well, whatever. So a lot of times for minor things, they'd have to heal themselves. So the root doctors were these people that would take this knowledge of the herbal healing, digging up roots and making teas out of pine needles, all these kind of things, and would help heal the community. They also felt that fit that archetypal image of the magician as well as the healer. And after Reconstruction, after the Civil War ended, Reconstruction was coming in, a lot of these coastal areas, the white plantation owners and their entourage, they left. They pretty much lost the plantations, or they just abandoned them. So a lot of these people that, as we were talking about, the Gullah, or what they're called, the descendants of slaves, moved out into those what we call the Sea Islands, and were able to maintain some degree of their culture that they had synchronized, blended in, and they have their own language, their own customs. It's that blend of West, but also of Africa, and it's a fascinating, lovely culture. But after Reconstruction, you start to see a increase of the presence of the hoodoo doctors among the population, who would be there for those Gullah communities to help heal or to not heal, to possibly curse. They call it black magic. And I mean black not as in a racial distinction, but more of a looking as a negative magic. And that's what, unfortunately, we talk about hoodoo. It gets a bad rap because, the media, movies, television, novels kind of generally will cast a negative light on those kind of practices. But I found that by researching this area, that's a lot of those practices, a lot of those ideas, a lot of those beliefs are still very prevalent. They're just very, very hidden in today's world.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like I think of that movie Fight Club, where the first rule of hoodoo is no one talks about hoodoo, and down here in Florida, it's different. It's so funny because we have Latinx and Caribbean community, Haitian community. And so you go in the grocery store, you've got icons, you have devotional candles. It's more in the open. But again, I think it's because it's a normative here, and so it's more accepted. But it's funny, it's having moved here from Virginia 30 years ago, it was one of the first things that I was like, whoa, this is different. Yeah. All the saints lined up on the grocery store shelves. And it's like, I would buy them because they were just they were neat collector things. But so to get back to the hoodoo, that's almost, and in your book, you really emphasize that it's difficult to sort of crack open into that and get people to open up about it.
Yeah, it's you brought up an interesting point about more the Latinx population and all these. That's been my experience talking to someone who ran a store across the Savannah River here. They call it Curio, which is really all hoodoo related paraphernalia. And he says he said, well, most of my clients are now Hispanic. So where they used to be traditionally African American, he said, I still get Black people coming in, but he said, I think about 75 to 80% are now, Hispanic. And so, that's an interesting shift, whereas it's not as secretive. Whereas in the African American community, at least my experience, now it's changing with the internet and those kind of things, but a lot of people who are considered authentic root workers didn't advertise a whole lot. Some did, but a lot of them didn't. I have often wondered if it's because historically during the 20th century, the more you could appear like the dominant culture, the actual safer you were. Because if you're doing something so out of the realm, so demonized, that could be a risk, not just financially, but possibly even physically. So I think, and that's just kind of my perspective, but maybe just keeping it under the underground. What's interesting, I had a colleague who taught at a Savannah State College, and she found that by just talking about these things,
Dr. Martin,
her students would come to her and go, you know what, my grandmother did those kind of things, and then it would talk to her, like, guess what, your grandma was a root woman. And had no idea. So.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up Dr. Kamala Martin, and because I think it's great that this is being offered as a course, and especially in this region, like you said, that people you're normalizing it a little more, or maybe helping it to have some. And I can't imagine in the 21st century that it would be as difficult as it was 60 years ago, but that it can have its place in above ground.
Well, I'm going to tell you something, Justin. The truth here is if you go in and you type in hoodoo and you want to find a hoodoo doctor, you will find, you Googling that, you will find that the majority of sites that you come across and the people you come across look like me and you.
Mm-hmm.
They don't look African American, because a lot, and I'm saying there are some out there, but there's still this I think a hesitancy for a lot of African Americans to who have these abilities, or whatever, to come out publicly with this art. I consider it an art.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you've seen, because there's a perceived absence, as we're talking about balance. Now you find people, like say the people, Latinx population, Caucasians who are becoming root doctors and all of that, to kind of fill the void, because obviously there's a lot of interest, a lot of novelty, if you will, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way, just because it's so unique. I'll give you an example. I did this presentation every now and then for therapy conferences called Hoodoo Therapy. And it's called Hoodoo Therapy, what I learned about creative psychotherapy from root doctors, or something like that. And I remember I was doing this conference, and they put me on like a late afternoon on a Saturday or Sunday. It's like the last day of the conference. And usually if you get 4 or 5 people show up, that's pretty good. Okay. So I said, okay, well, and not much is happening here, but man, I walked in the room. There wasn't a seat available. I just saw this sea of people.
Wow.
And I'm like, what is going on? I even wondered if I was in the wrong room. I stepped out, looked at the number.
Yeah, okay, check for your name. Oh, God.
And it's just, people were fascinated with it. Like I say, there's curiosity about it. And I guess my goal, and I think overall I've done my best, I think I've met it, is to at least provide a dialogue for people about this topic, to see it as a legitimate tradition of magic and healing, and a legitimate tradition of culture that needs to be honored. And I'm a big believer in, you don't always have to acknowledge that something's real to see that it can have positive impacts in the community. Just living here in South Carolina, it's really benefited me to learn about this stuff, because every now and then you never know who's going to walk through your door. And if they're talking about something that you're not familiar with, or they're hesitant to talk about that, there may be a little limit in the amount of help we can provide. So being open to our clients' beliefs, whether it's hoodoo, Christian Science, whatever persuasion they go, being open in as a way to utilize whatever they already believe to help them get the change that they want, I think is really, really important.
Absolutely. And a couple of other characters in your book, persons in your book, were Bernice and Andy, and you had talked about sort of the appropriation by folks that may not, it's white and black, and I don't see that as the appropriation that's usually thrown around by the social justice community. It's more that they are less brought up, there's less lineage. So like people who do Reiki are all about that lineage stuff. And so I honor that in hoodoo. I mean, it seems like that's something that you should have a lineage or a history to yourself. But I love the fact that Bernice and Andy, I think Bernice was associated with that area, and she went to New York, and they just came down and they lit another candle or another light for this practice to keep it going and keep it alive. So those stories are inspiring.
Yeah, Andy and Bernice Tate are 2 dear friends of mine. They are artists here in the Low Country. As you said, Bernice is from here. She's from Sheldon, which is right down the road from Beaufort. Is the hotbed of hoodoo.
Okay.
And grew up. She's Gullah, and she's if anyone wants to look up for Gullah-inspired artwork and culture, just type in Andy and Bernice Tate. Bernice has done some really remarkable art exhibits. They're kind of challenging, some stereotypes of how to create art, but there's
Nice.
always some element in a lot of their work of this undercurrent of color, Africa, what I call Afrocentric spirituality, and they see, and this is what's very helpful to me because I saw a great parallel between the way they taught and one of my heroes, Alejandro Jodorowsky, the Chilean filmmaker.
Yeah.
And in that, magic is about creation, and they both see, or all three of them see, creating art as creating magic.
Oh yeah.
And how the art transforms consciousness. Well, that's what magic is supposed to do. So it's fascinating for them. Now, what's funny, you said about appropriation, both Andy and Bernice, they don't see any problem with people who aren't African American doing hoodoo. Right. They, as long as I think, we acknowledge where it came from and be respectful to it. It's a funny thing about lineage too. You brought that up. For me, lineage is always, it's something, it's nice, but it reminds me of my days back when I was doing martial arts, and some guys were all about their lineage. I'm a direct lineage to whatever founder or whatever school. Other guys could have absolutely no lineage, but they say, I don't need lineage. I have results. I can do what needs to be done, or I can teach what needs to be done. So it's like finding that middle ground is in, do you really have to have this, lineage that goes, well, you name all the great grandmasters of martial arts or hoodoo or painting or whatever. It just comes down to performance. And I think that's looking at hoodoo as a performance art is what I got from Andy and Bernice, and it ties into some of the things I've read. Some other people in my field who talked about, maybe psychotherapy should be seen as a performance art because you're doing what's happening in the moment to create that shift in awareness and consciousness on the part of the client.
Right. So I think my invocation of appropriation was, again, less about what we see in the broader context of our American culture, and more that, like, what Dr. Coyote was lamenting, in the sense that the neo-pagan movement and other sort of new age spiritualists were just hanging that shingle out. And maybe I think he was sort of, again, lamenting that, and he even asked this in your book. He's like, who called you a doctor? Do you call yourself? So that's kind of where I was coming from. And I'm sure there's some of that, but like you said, I agree. And I think that tolerance and diversity, have to come into play with everything. Whether it's the arts, because, you don't want to exclude, it's almost like an apartheid. You don't want to exclude somebody because they are of a particular cultural or ethnic persuasion. It's just, we have to be open to the intent of the person that is doing the work. So I'll qualify what I said by saying this. I was just more echoing what Dr. Coyote was saying.
Sure, absolutely.
And Angel Rakim, I want to bring her up because her father, I think the story, if I remember, and I've just read this a couple weeks ago, the story is fascinating about her. Talk about genetic lineage here, her life, where she went on her path. It's a good story about her in there as well.
Yeah, Angel was originally from Savannah, Georgia, and her father was William Barnum Sr., and everyone called him Prophet. And he was a well-known root doctor, but he was also involved in the church process that everyone does, but he was also a spiritualist. So he would be what we call now a medium. And now this is very rare, I'm told. And Angel was very clear saying that, in the, not a lot of mediums in the African American community. So he was kind of a groundbreaker during the 50s and 60s and all of this. He had this big head of hair and beard. He looked like Moses, and Angel said that they have some, blending of different cultures somewhere in the family. And so a lot of his hair would, he was an African-American man, but his beard and hair was red.
Whoa.
So it was really startling. And he had this commanding presence to him. And he would drive this, he had this yellow, I think like a LTD or something, or, Crown Vic, painted yellow, like an old taxi cab, but it would have all these mystical symbols painted all over it. So anytime he'd drive by, everyone, well, there's Prophet. But she'd talk about how Prophet took her to with him, because they knew pretty early about her abilities, that she said, to an older lady who lived in Rocky Ford, Georgia, which is probably about an hour west of Savannah, and seeing all these kind of wild things that this woman was, that she was like her father's teacher, and indirectly kind of her teacher as well. What's funny with Angel is that for years she has been working as what she calls a spiritual analyst, which basically is a root worker and a medium and that kind of thing. But she's also got a doctorate, just recently got a doctorate in counselor education and supervision. So Angel will not only just be having a foot in the hoodoo world, but she'll have a foot in the world I inhabit of counseling and psychotherapy. So I'm kind of interested to talk to her down the road and see how she's navigating both of those. But yeah, it's again a lineage of people who are root workers. And I just again want to point out that men and women traditionally, I mean, there's never just you have a root worker that's a man, or it's only a woman. I mean, it was pretty interchangeable throughout that culture.
Which is progressive, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
When you were writing this book and in the process of engaging with these folks and feeling the energy around them, is there a palpable difference in being in their presence? And I could say that intuitively. You could go as far as psychically, because we all know when we're in a room and certain people will give off, and as you said earlier in a session, sometimes the therapist will pick up subliminal things that don't register consciously. So what was your experience in this investigative process in meeting these people? And I don't say impression in terms of like a sterile analytical, but just what impact did this research have on you as far as interacting with these folks?
Well, most of the people I met were very friendly. Mm-hmm. And the ones who weren't friendly, they weren't mean or rude, they're just kind of
standoffish.
Yeah. And I get it. I mean, here they don't know me. I'm a white guy knocking on doors.
Yeah, right. Who are you?
But a lot of them were just really nice. I can't say that I sensed a esoteric feeling, like I just felt like the energy surged through. You talk about
stands up on your neck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the great stories about all the Hindu gurus, come over and he walked in the room, and I felt, I don't know. I just felt for a lot of them, they're fairly comfortable with themselves. There's only one or two, and a lot of I didn't put in the book because some of them didn't want me to talk about what they were doing or not use their names. But a couple of them I just didn't click with. But going back to Angel, I mean, the second I got Angel's number and I called her. Second we said hello, I knew we were friends. It was just so instantaneous, and it's like we've known each other. I can't speak for her, but for me, it was like we've known each other for years. And that, I think, is a lot of her personality. Andy and Bernice, I think they were initially kind of, okay, well, what do you want, right? They're always polite. What do you want? But instantly within meeting them, there's that level of comfort. And I just think in general, when you are sincerely interested in other people, and people can sense that you don't have any other agenda other than to learn from them or to share, you're going to get a pretty authentic interaction.
Doors will open up.
Yeah, I think so. Overall, I just say they were, really nice people. Now, I will tell you, I can't tell you what, because I don't know if I should, but Angel told me something initially about a situation, just kind of out of the blue, about a situation I was going through, and I hadn't told her.
Mm.
And she kind of surprised me, is that she kind of knew what was going on, and it's kind of a personal thing. And the other party, I don't think it's fair to the other party to
No,
share,
no, no,
but
that's fine.
she, yeah, she kind of spooked me there for a second. She didn't probably remember that, but she did, you know.
Well, even though I practice FOK, I give credence to the idea that information, I believe in that sort of primacy of consciousness. And so if it's there, it's there. And some people may
Sure.
just be able to sense things and pick things up. So you got to give a little credit to that.
Mhm.
And on that subject, you're a man of two worlds, and you investigate the world of, as the esoteric and the possible, maybe that's a good way to say it, and then the sort of the billiard balls, the causal stuff. And so what I would say to people watching this, and God knows I have a coarse-grained apprehension of what I'm about to talk about, but I think in therapy, you have legends like when I was reading this book, I was thinking of the Lacanian registry theory, the triadic system that one of his theories that he put out about, there was the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real, and it's a circular pattern. And so the real relates to the imaginary. And so what is the imaginary? It is a creative thinking process. Imagination gets a bad rap. It's like you tell a 5-year-old, oh, it's just, no. For me, it's like, it's such a beautiful, expansive word. So I was thinking about that. And then Jung, I mean, we could go into Jung for a while about his affordances of his affordance of this type of thinking. And so when I think of hoodoo, as you've pointed out, it was the folks medicine, it was the folks therapy, it was a sort of the general store of well-being and betterment and health and recovery. And but in reading it, I was able to think on other more European, more Western schools of again, therapy, but and also the philosophical input to therapy. So I think there is substance there if you're not a super hard-headed, whatever you want to call an empiricist, or somebody who just kind of rejects things that aren't concrete, laid out.
Right. Yeah. But I think, again, it's all also the context. If we look at the context of what's happening, so hoodoo apparently is an effective way for people to get results, because if not, it would have probably just dried up and nobody'd be doing it. So is it effective in every context? Well, probably not, but neither is psychotherapy. I mean, to be quite honest, I think outside the laws of nature, I mean, so much really depends on context. Even nature, in some aspects of nature, does, because if you put a cell in a bad context, it's going to die, or it'll change, or those kind of things. So maybe for somebody from Sweden, hoodoo might not be the best way for creating changes of consciousness or solving problems, or it may be. I mean, I don't know, but I think when we come down to, again, this idea of that we can never really know anything for sure,
right,
is we can have evidence to support an assertion, but outside those laws of nature, it's a lot of gray areas. It's like I was talking with a colleague who said that he felt he used this one theory of working with clients, because he said he felt 85% of his clients got better. I said, well, what about the other 15%, 20%? He didn't really have an answer. So it's like, well, it's not going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
Those 20% or so might needed something else, maybe a different context, or God forbid, a different therapist.
Yeah.
So I'm very analytical, and I tend to left brain it a lot. So for me, it is a bit of a struggle, because I do like things I can understand.
Right.
But we don't like things that we can't understand. It makes us uncomfortable and nervous. And when we get nervous, we have to cling to something that gives us comfort. And if we say, well, that stuff doesn't exist, if that gives us comfort, that's what we're going to do. Yeah. And maybe we're right. Maybe we're not. I don't know. It's kind of interesting, kind of what if,
Oh, absolutely. And so what I said a moment ago, and I'm excluding the appeal to the supernatural when I say what I say that you, as maybe somebody who's an empiricist or somebody who wants observable, repeatable results, that, again, that's not an appeal to the supernatural so much as it is an appeal to, as you said, possibility, as well as in context of being on a plantation in the 18th, 19th century is one of the worst places you could be in the Western Hemisphere. Well, up there, and with some of the horrible things that colonialism and slavery did, it worked and it had value, and it was that general store, that catch-all for all the different therapies that they couldn't have access to. So whatever was going on was consensual. It was reciprocal and collaborative, as you pointed out in your talks. And so give that credence. And again, you don't have to think about, was there really magic going on? Okay, whatever, whatever your spectrum is. But I think you have to credit the hoodoo practice, the provenance of American hoodoo, with saying that it worked for its time and in its context, and it's still here, has legs in the 21st century. Because again, I think there is a placebo, there is a strong association with consent and willingness to work through something, whether it's a minor physical ailment or with maybe something more psychological. So yeah, absolutely. But it is a fascinating book, to be sure, and I would definitely recommend it to people, because again, it falls into a beautiful space where it just leaves you to interpret what's going on, and not, there's no you're not leading anybody. There's no leading in this at all. It's just you're presenting what you've discovered, and I think that's really cool. And again, as somebody who's lived in the South pretty much all their life, I was born in Maryland, but I lived in Virginia and Florida, for 38 years or 40 years. It's a nice piece of regional history. It's a piece of culture that is fascinating. And again, living in I'm kind of on the northern cusp of South Florida. It's mostly New York and New Jersey, or Caribbean. I mean, it's a Creole here. We have a lot of things going on, but for Western folks like myself, it's not Southern here at all. There are local communities of good, I call them, good old boys, like I grew up with in Virginia, but it's a mixed culture here. So you have something very special in that region in South Carolina and Georgia that's been preserved. And I think it's beautiful. Other than your program, Creating Magical Sessions, do you have anything else you want to share about what you're up to and what's on the radar for looking forward?
Well, my goal is always just to keep evolving and growing myself. I have a new book coming out probably June or July called Transforming Themes, Creative Interactions in Psychotherapy. And it's kind of building on what we talked about a little bit earlier about how transformation of client themes can sometimes lead to healing quicker than staying within rigid psychotherapy themes. But I'm always learning, always growing. I'm trying to figure out how to approach the world with a little less attachment to what I want, and just kind of seeing what comes my way. But it's more books. I'm hoping this course, I've gotten a lot of really good feedback of this program from therapists, and that honestly is just so that means a lot to me, because it's like that's how I feel I'm making the field better. It's one thing when I'm working with my clients, I'm helping them, but if I can like sit up here and then some of my influence could filter down, maybe therapists and coaches who are taking some of these ideas and helping more people more effectively and more transformationally, that's I'm kind of that's a good legacy. I think even if I'm forgotten in 5 minutes, at least that's a good 5 minutes, man.
Yeah. Well, even if your name doesn't age as glory in a glorious your work will be carried forward, I believe, because again, I think it's a beautiful opportunity or brilliant opportunity to have an integrative practice, and whether it's something that you've introduced or just something that that breaks out of that paradigm of a more structured system, and people being concerned about who's looking, the imaginary professors or authorities looking over the shoulder, and you're being hypercritical of yourself, like, oh, did I say the right thing to my client or my patient, and getting people into their own rhythm, because that can, I don't know a lot, but I can intuit at least that would be very productive and very beneficial, which is what the world needs right now and has always needed, but it hasn't diminished in any way, that folks need outlets and places to go to talk things out and figure things out for themselves and do some healing, do some transformative work, for sure. I'd like to ask, for yourself and your practice, are you working with individual patients right now? Are you taking patients?
I am. Yeah, I am. I'm pretty booked up,
Okay.
but I still see people. I keep my practice very small, my private practice, because I like to give people the attention that they need, rather than focus on getting as many people in. And I really am grateful that I'm able to work in a way that I feel is best, without too much rigidity, and no longer have to work in the, for what we call community mental health or state facilities that, sometimes are a little rigid. My teaching, my full-time gig is being a college instructor, and that has afforded me ability to not have to see 100 clients and just try to pack them in. That it's more of a labor of love than a labor of income. So I still do that, and hopefully they'll keep coming. Hopefully they find the benefit, move on, and others come. But that's okay. It's all good.
Yeah, for sure. Can you share what your courses are? What you focus on with teaching?
Oh, right now I'm just teaching mostly, the basics, everything from general introductory psych to abnormal to diagnostic treatment planning, counseling theories, those kind of things.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. And in a sort of timely relevance, both, I would imagine, the individual practice and what you do as a teacher professor has been sort of moved on to online, or are you able to do in class at this?
Well, right now I'm finishing up online, but the college is now back, trying to get back the way it is. But I never stopped seeing clients in person.
Oh, good.
We were able to have a space and conditions in place that those who wanted to come in, we have masks and things like that, and more than enough distance.
All the appropriate measures.
Yeah. But I've only had like 1 or 2 people that even wanted to not see me in person. So, but I actually prefer in person anyway. We have a good, you and I have a good rapport, but I'm sure it would be even better if we were sitting across from each other. It's just that energy of 2 people. So
there's physical cues that aren't really being demonstrated on a Zoom call. And I would imagine, again, if you have to develop an intimacy quickly with a patient or a client, that being in their presence is, and that's kind of what I was hinting around at. I was like, oh gosh, that's got to add a burden to you to have that sort of contact. And I use the term intimate in a professional sense, that you have to, connect with somebody very quickly and get their trust and get things going. So that's awesome that you were able to maintain and do it that way. So I consider this part 1. If you're interested, we can have you come back, and I'll pick up a couple more of your books, and maybe we can spend some time talking about more of your work. I'd love to talk about the Ericksonian hypnotherapy that is that part of what you offer, or are you just an interested student of the Ericksonian work?
I'm a student, and I also offer training in Ericksonian therapy and hypnosis and things like that. Erickson's work was very foundational for me. Definitely.
I've got a couple books that were Michael Yapko. I've got 1 or 2 of his books. I think he worked with Ericksonian teaching as well.
He has a background in the Ericksonian work and strategic therapy and things like that. He and I sometimes bump into each other at conferences, at the Erickson Congress and the Brief Therapies. Very, very good. Nice guy.
Cool, cool. Yeah, he's kind of on my target list to interview. I reached out to him once, and he's probably busy or something, but I'll eventually see if I can connect with him and bring him on board for an interview, because I think that would be interesting. Because I enjoyed both of his books, especially there was one, Trans Work. I'm sorry, I'm cheating and referencing my bookshelf right now. It's been about 3 years since I've read the book, but yeah, fascinating work. Dr. Leslie, Paul, it's been a great conversation. Did you want to round out with anything? I'll give you an opportunity if you wanted to put anything else out before we say goodbye. And okay.
No, just my website's drpaulleslie.com. Easy to remember, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and I appreciate anyone who took the time to listen to me. I mean, I think one of the greatest gifts we can give to each other is the gift of attention. And if anyone watching or listening has been giving me that, I'm very honored.
Oh, amen. Amen. It's great. And you can see it on your analytics on YouTube. Like, you can see what percent stays to the very end. And so if I can get in around 8 to 10%, I'm like, yes, that's anywhere from 15 to 200 people that, stuck. So all of you who are out here still watching this on YouTube, you are respected and cherished by both of us. And speaking of YouTube, I would really, those of you who are still here, you would benefit from subscribing to Paul's YouTube channel, Paul J. Leslie, and I will have that link as well. He's got some great work, great interviews, good people. I watched was it Kathleen Shannon, or she's a therapist in just outside of Asheville. Great conversation about spiritual trauma. I mean, there's good content there. So I would definitely recommend, if this is your thing, to go over to Dr. Leslie's YouTube channel and check it out, because there's a lot of good content there. So, including an interview you did with Jeffrey Mishlove. You brought him on board, which I thought was awesome.
Right, I did.
Interview the interviewer. Yeah, that's a series I'd like to start. Right, is to interview interviewers and bring people like Jeffrey on board and just pick their brains and let them go for about an hour. So I think it'd be cool.
Exactly.
So, all right, Dr. Leslie, I appreciate it. I'm very grateful that we had time to be able to dialogue, an opportunity to dialogue. And I look forward to another conversation. I'll say goodbye to you after I stop the record button. And to everyone who was here, again, we're grateful that you stuck with us in this conversation. And I bid you all a good afternoon. So I'll go ahead and stop the record, and then you and I will say goodbye.